Arcane Season 2, Episode 2. There's a lot of things we could discuss. Victor turning into Moses, and the very kind of cold, resolute, I don't know what the word is, when your focus is just absorbed elsewhere, the way Victor leaves Jace. I really love that scene. Is this Hexcore overtaking Victor's personality, or is he just seeing what Jace has done against his wishes, seeing he's made weapons, understanding why he did it, accepting there's no point fighting over something that's already done, and just being resolved to walk a different path? Maybe. We could talk about the tender scene between Savika and Jinx, Heimerdinger discovering a new lease of life, or obviously the very, very fun fight scene.
Feel free to step in any time.
You alright?
I didn't want to cramp your style.
Actually though, I think it's this scene with Jinx that might be my favourite from the episode. That's the one I want to focus on. If I'm honest, it surprised me how much I like this, and I think it highlights just what makes Arcane so very special as a show. So let's get into it. For context, it's worth stating that there is a scene we open with before this one, Jinx's monologue. A wonderfully tragic scene of her hugging Silco under the water, just like his story of Vander holding him underwater in Season 1 before coming back, except this time he doesn't come back. It also includes my favourite quote from the episode.
I used to say I could fix anything. Before I broke everything.
Which is a really key point that gets to the heart of Jinx's internal conflict here, the hope to repair things set against the shame of breaking them. We have seen her constantly move back and forth between the somewhat childish hope of just being able to pick up again where she left off with Vi, set against a kind of, well, it can't be fixed, so screw it, let's just blow the whole thing up and start again, I don't care. Jinx also explains that Zorn has descended into chaos, with wannabe street thugs squabbling over scraps.
Just like when Vander shoved off. Except this time, you aren't here to put it all back together.
That's an interesting line, with an implication that almost goes under the radar. It implies it's now Jinx's job to put things back together. But Jinx breaks everything. Jinx is bad. Jinx can't do that, can she? Alright, so here's the scene I'm interested to talk about. We open with Silco sitting at a table before suddenly being frozen in time, zooming out to all the other Chem Barons as they're all erased one by one until only the survivors remain, who then break into fighting over Silco's chair. It's interesting we see that when Jinx has already kind of described all of this to us in the previous scene. Why do we need it again? Well, I think it's because the first scene was setting up Jinx's responsibility. The idea it's up to her to piece together the remains of Silco's legacy, where this scene shows us her reaction to that responsibility. Is Jinx piecing anything together? Savika is the one at the table attempting to unite everyone against the enforcers. Jinx is nowhere to be found. Instead, she's just walking aimlessly through the centre of all chaos. It's an interesting kind of beat one for Jinx this season. The world's gone to shit, and regardless of what she should do, Jinx doesn't care. And she later says to Savika,
The hell we supposed to do now?
Watch it all burn.
So keep that in mind, we're coming back to it in a moment. But the other important point is that we've had quite a few scenes already of people this season walking with their hoods up, lonely through the streets. I think this one is especially quite similar to Vi in episode 1, each complete with a backing track and a surrounding backdrop that they're walking through as though barely noticing it. If that is a parallel, I think that's interesting. The big difference between the twos, of course, being that Vi's moment is very sad, the music is sad, the visuals are grey, and Vi is sitting with that emotion. She is equally sad, attempting to process her grief and her guilt. We see her caught between wanting to reach out to Caitlyn, but also afraid about doing so. Afraid Caitlyn might be as angry as Caitlyn's father is, the fear that the rupture she has caused is too big to possibly repair, so should Vi even dare trying? Well, Vi does try in the end. We see her move closer and closer until she and Caitlyn talk. She is a woman with some hope to repair, but Jinx is the total opposite. Her music is not sad, or at least not directly, it's not the direct feeling, and Jinx is not directly sad. She is not attempting to reach anyone or to repair anything, and her backdrop is not a sad grey landscape, it is a hurricane. Absolute carnage on all sides, because that's what's most familiar to Jinx, being at the centre of a hurricane. I think chaos partly soothes her because of its familiarity. Rather than attempting to process the pain and the grief and exploring her vulnerability, what we're seeing here is Jinx, I would say, trying to wake up, trying to feel alive.
Buzzing behind your eyes? Because you know in a moment they could all... Boom! Best feeling in the world, kid.
Jinx wants to feel something that isn't pain. What better methods than chaos, than the thrill of danger, the drama of violence? And yet, despite that, it all continues to just feel like a backdrop to her. Even all of this can't make her feel alive. The key line in the song is, of course, "I'm already dead inside." So, for that much, this scene is great. Jinx is too overwhelmed by her shame and guilt and grief to be able to work through them and to be able to dare trying to repair things. But then something else happens, and I think this is where it kicks up a notch. This is the bit that made it stand out to me.
You feel it? That buzzing behind your eyes? Because you know...
You have 51% off World Anvil?
Best feeling in the world.
Oh, you better believe it's World Anvil. They are sponsoring this video. They are offering you 51% off, and they are an online tool for building worlds, you may have guessed. But also creating characters, designing and managing campaigns for all sorts of different games. My best friend uses it for D&D, but there's lots of other games. You can use it for planning your stories, writing your stories, working on all sorts of creative projects. For me, it is my novel. I need a tool like this, otherwise I am far too chaotic. We're moving flat soon, and I literally have 6 cardboard boxes full of random sheets of A4 paper I've written old ideas on. Pre-World Anviled me was a nightmare. So with something like this, not only can I keep everything organised, keep it all in one place, be able to easily edit things, but I can create timelines, I can create hyperlinks branching off specific characters or articles, or a billion other things that just make it so much easier to find stuff. Planning things can be hard, especially when there's so much to do, but having all of these tools to help visualize it, to help split everything down into specific points, articles one at a time, it helps immensely. I'm not going to show you because it's a secret, but I've created different bio pages for all of the characters in my world, even the minor ones, which house they live in, what their job is, who they're friends with, who they hate, what different beliefs they have or opinions about events that go on in a book, or whatever. So, World Anvil is great. I hope you can hear my passion, and if you desire, if you crave. If you call to the heavens for a 51% discount, then use the code TREE, or click the link in the description, or the pinned comment, or if you just want to try out the free version, then go for that. You know, there's no time limit on it. Test it out for as long as you want. World Anvil. We meet Isha? This kid who obviously looks a lot like Powder falls from the sky and interrupts Jinx's lonely, walking, boulevard of broken dreams moment. Except she doesn't really interrupt it, you know, the music doesn't miss a beat when she falls. Jinx is barely surprised. At most, she looks mildly irritated. Even a girl literally falling from the sky on top of her doesn't quite bring her out of her numbness. I love the detail as well of her eyes flashing fierce and bright, or softening in colour, depending on her emotion. And we then see some goons drop down who literally have 1, 2, and 3 tattooed on their foreheads. I love that. I love how very over the top and bombastic and kind of Dickensian we're seeing a lot of the Ken Barron characters and all of these gangs looking this season. Jinx shoots them all with total impulse and then seems indifferent afterwards, barely affected by what she's done. These loud gunshots that leave your ears ringing, and yet the music just continues on as a chant before kicking back in afterwards. Isha then spots these posters on the wall.
Yep, that's me. You ever need to curse a sibling or a family or a society? My card.
That's the bit that made me go, oh, this is like a villain's introductory scene. And it so is. Here's the random innocent villain who has the misfortune of bumping into someone dangerous, someone who doesn't care about killing, who has a clever one-liner to express just how very bad she is before walking on. All of it very dark and edgy. That line is literally Jinx telling this kid, yep, I'm the villain, everybody hates me, I'm dark and I'm dangerous, but is she? Well, yes, obviously, on one hand, but I mean to say, the thing I love so much about this scene is that it hits all the beats of a villain's introduction, and yet at the same time is completely undermining it. Firstly, because we saw right before this a scene all about Jinx being very vulnerable and caring, definitely caring. So when we now see a scene of her appearing totally indifferent to everything, we know why. It's a defense. She feels totally numb. We should know that anyway about Jinx. I think it should be obvious, but it is important to emphasize it again for a new season, and especially so when you are doing a scene that does hit some of those beats of the dark, edgy trope figure, you know? Also, the fact it parallels the scene with Vi tells us she's going through a very similar experience to her, just reacting in different ways. And thirdly, we see Jinx do a good thing. She saves an innocent child's life, a child who also looks a lot like a young Jinx. That's not a villain. As much as she talks about cursing people, she did something very good. Doesn't even appear she murders the goons. So is she bad? Does Isha think that? Should we think that? You know, it does make me laugh when I think about it. Jinx is lost ruminating on how very bad and hated and cursed she is, blasting music within her mind like a teenager with headphones on, when a kid interrupts the brooding, forces Jinx to do something very good before she then goes back to brooding on her badness like nothing at all just happened. Not only is that fun, but it's also real. I can't express just how often as people we have very rigid beliefs about ourselves, whilst totally ignoring all of the things we do that counter those beliefs. We do so much stuff that goes against them, and yet we barely even notice. I even really like the idea that there might be a part of Jinx here waving this gun about trying to scare Isha, and then the fact that absolutely doesn't work, Isha goes following after her. That's quite a nice little undermining. Even following on from this, as much as she tells Sevika they should watch it all burn, who cares, we then see Jinx go away and make Sevika a new arm. Wrap it up like a present with a bow. That's actually very sweet. And it is quite vulnerable giving people gifts because it means admitting you care and it means opening yourself up for rejection. So Jinx defends against that. She only throws Sevika the gift when she's about to fight in combat. And when Sevika looks to her, she gives an indifferent shrug like, whatever, it was nothing. But it was something. And I think her defensiveness here in many ways makes it doubly sweet, seeing her so clearly uncomfortable with doing something nice for Sevika, and yet still choosing to do it anyway. As a little tangent, I'm so used to this kind of experience as a children's therapist, working with kids who've been told all their lives that they're horrible and they kind of believe that, seeing them doing something very sweet and good, but also because they're so unfamiliar and so uncomfortable with the idea of being that, kind of being defensive about it afterwards. All of Jinx's words, mannerisms, her habits suggests she is saying, I am a terrible person, I am a villain, I destroy everything and I enjoy it, so you should absolutely stay away from me. And yet, even if you hadn't seen season 1 and you knew nothing about her, you can look closely at these scenes and we're shown the exact opposite of that beneath the surface. Someone who wants to do good, someone who feels she does have some responsibility and wants someone to connect to, only she fears it's impossible and doesn't want to open herself up. Does she save Aisha just because she enjoys the thrill of shooting people, enjoys that buzz behind the eyes? That's what she's saying is the reason, but is that true? Is that all it was? In my mind, of course not. As much as Jinx might be reluctant to admit it, she genuinely wants to save this kid because she cares. It's just she offers an excuse to avoid showing that. So far, I think season 2 is showing us a Jinx caught in conflict between building something, repairing Zorn, following through on Zilko's plans, and someone giving up, watching it all burn, including herself there, blazing out in a self-destructive violence where we do get so many hints about Jinx wanting to die. The reason I love this scene is because it reminds me just how surprising this show is. You know, I didn't watch ARCANE at all until several weeks ago. I'd been told often it was good, but I'd seen glimpses of Jinx, and I mistook her characterization for glamorizing mental health issues, the way a lot of media can do, and we know there is tropes about that very thing. Having mental health issues is dark and edgy and cool, and it makes you an oddly glorified person in a lot of media, which I don't like. Not to say anyone with mental health issues can't be cool, obviously that's not the case, but we can't present someone as just that, they also need to be human. I thought ARCANE was going to be the worst of that trope, and written by worse writers, this scene would have been exactly that, an edgy, villainous montage showing just how bad and cool Jinx is without even a hint of irony. But there is irony here, and that's really important, not just because it adds a bit of humour, but it does so in an empathetic, rather than mocking way that makes Jinx all the more human. I think it takes an incredible amount of maturity to write a character who does hit all of these typical tropes, but does so without it becoming reductive. It's great, and this scene reminded me how great that is about this show. It's not the obvious big emotional scene I could have talked about, but even in the moments where the show is being kinda cool, there is still so much more. As ever, this show is fantastic. It just is. I've enjoyed talking about this episode. There is more I could say, but I've got to get on with making a video about episode 3, so we're going to leave it there. Comment your thoughts, whatever they are, good and bad. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe, support me on Patreon or buy me a coffee if that's your thing, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Flying Spider, Grace, Kellyanne Davidson, Luke Orr, Michael Gallagher, Chad Bramwell and Joshua C. Follier. Thank you.